Thank you. So yes, my name is Hein van Hustenberg, and I'm a professor at the Aspire Centre for Rehabilitation Engineering and Assistive Technology at University College London. And I'd like to say before I start that following on from the previous talk and given by such a well-known and remarkable speaker, I feel about as nervous as a first-year PhD student, despite the fact that I've given over 100 talks in my career. So I don't even have the buzz of the energy from the room or the buzz of being on a stage. So here we go. I'm feeling like I'm talking on my own to myself, and it's probably for the better. The message really in this talk is if EDI, I apologize that we use EDI or DEI. I'm more familiar with the words EDI, so I'm not going to try to change them for the talk. But if equality, diversity, and inclusivity is good, why is a workforce not representative of a diverse population? And I just really want to look at some of the reasons for that in a way that's kind of trying to be positive and constructive. So to start with, I just want to clear one common misconception, which Françoise also alluded to in her talk, which is EDI, DEI is not the new name of feminism. It's in fact a lot more than feminism. In the Equality Act of 2010, which legally protects people from discrimination in the workplace and in wider society, the protected characteristics include age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage, civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. So you can see it's a lot more than feminism. Some people will argue that the Equality Act is no longer fit for purpose. Particularly, it does not consider gender identity. It is also unable to consider the complexities of multiple additive discriminations and intersectionalities. Nevertheless, it's an important milestone in the increased concerns and increased awareness that we have around the fact that at the moment, there is no equality. And so we need this to be enshrined in law. As François said, diversity is broader than gender. And the composition of a workforce should be representative of the UK population at every level and for every aspect of these protected characteristics. So I will very briefly make the business case for EDI, but it's been made so many times. Now, as an academic, I tend to go for hard fact-based data that have been verified by repeated studies. And so I present here 3 studies to you. The first one, most of the EDI work you will see focus on ethnic and gender diversity. So the first one demonstrated that having diversity at executive board or director level was positively correlated with return on investments and return on assets. So that's a good incentive for companies to consider this increased diversity in your board. You'll see benefits. I'm not discussing here the why at the moment. I just want to show you that without understanding why, if you do that, you'll get benefits. There was a very good study by Carter et al. That showed that organizations with more than one ethnic minority board member performed better than those without any. It's only more than one. So if you have 2, you're there. That's all you need. It's a big difference for a small step. Another study looked at gender and race diversity, and they found that you had increased sales revenue, more customers, greater market share, and greater relative profits. And if you want to know, all of these included companies that are relevant to our field in terms of engineering and technology. You can find more information in 2 reports that I use extensively since I've been doing these talks repeatedly. The first one is "The time for talking is over, now is the time to act," which is the McGregor-Smith review, which is specifically focused on the UK. It was published in 2017, and it presents data like that. So this is specifically for the UK economy. If Black and minority ethnic talent was fully utilized, by fully utilized, they mean in a ratio that is proportional or representative of what is in the white community. So they're not assuming 100%, they're assuming equal treatment to the white community. We would see the economy could receive a £24 billion boost. This was before COVID. I know things have changed, but the data still tells you how important, it's a strong business case with or without COVID. The other report that I will be using, and this one is really important because it uses data from 2020, but it was published with a very clear message that includes information around the impact of COVID. And they simply called it Diversity Wins. It's the third McKinsey & Company report that looks at inclusivity. And sorry, the data presented is something like that, for example. So this presents the difference in likelihood of outperformance of the first versus the fourth quartile. If your company is in the first quartile in terms of gender diversity, you're 25% more likely to outperform those in the fourth quartile, those that are the worst. And this has changed over time. You are more and more likely to outperform. The percentage increases. In the ethnicity, it is a stronger likelihood of outperforming. So you can see that both gender diversity and ethnic diversity have a strong benefit for companies. The McKinsey's report is an international report. The McGregor-Smith is just local to the UK. In McKinsey, as of 2019, they had a total of 1,090 companies involved, and as you can see, they represent countries across the world, with obviously some strong polls around the US where they started, and they represent a range of sectors, where the finance sector is represented here. You have the telecom, you have energy, so there's a range of sectors, all of which we can say are associated with our work. So we are very well represented in both of these reports. So I think if I stop now and kind of focus no longer on trying to convince you that it works, because you can read the 100 pages of each of these two reports, and it's astounding how much data there is in support of the impact of EDI in terms of a business case. So we now look at how does it work, and a lot of theories have been presented. Some theories can be grouped under the idea of a diverse group. A diverse group brings diverse approaches to problem solving. And usually when you have a situation that requires problem solving, it is because the established practices have failed. So where established practices fail, you need alternative thought processes. This is desirable, and that's why it might work. There is other theories around the diverse group theory, such as if you have a more diverse group, everybody has less fear of standing out, can be more creative, more daring. This is also called sometimes bringing your whole self to work. There's also a theory that is behind the idea that you have better conflict management. If staff are more comfortable with differences of opinion due to that diversity in the group, conflicts are identified earlier and staff are more amenable to compromise. It can lead to faster resolution. They also have the vocabulary to discuss conflicts and differences of opinions. There is less of what's called the fragility. The dominant group can express a fragility where they feel threatened by conflict, where there is no strong dominance because everyone feels represented for the individuals that they are. This fragility is removed and the vocabulary is provided to discuss differences of opinions, and that leads to much better conflict management, faster resolutions. And finally, there is an idea that if you have improved perception, and the word here, keyword is perception, of equality and opportunities, it will give you higher engagement and higher commitment from the staff. In terms of the company, there is a benefit also to the company. The first one is the widening of the talent pool. And this is really important, especially within the context of COVID, where companies suddenly found themselves maybe without their star, the one member of staff that was always asked to do the difficult thing, or to do that had become indispensable by the fact that the company hadn't diversified sufficiently in their staff. And when those members of staff became ill or unavailable due to COVID, they found themselves unable to turn around as quickly as those more diverse companies. Sorry, the next should come here. So we saw the only study I could find that provided very verifiable, tangible information was before COVID. There is a lot of data from during COVID that is currently being analyzed, but I, as an academic, I really will only rely on data that I consider to be verified and of the highest quality of evidence, as we would say. So I will quote the 2018 study with a clear understanding that there will be in 2021, 2022, a lot more studies published because of the impact of COVID on this. And finally, there is also a lot of information around the idea of retaining and growing the customer base and reputation. So a diverse company will have a better reputation, especially amongst people of the younger generation. You might call them woke, but in fact, they are customer base and they matter. So there is also a benefit in terms of customer base and reputation. Overall, we can say that there's unlikely to be a single definitive answer. And the question is not really about finding a reason why. We know it works. We also know that senior management is on board because it works. So this is just a typical example of one typical website. I took Accenture here because they have a very nice video of the CEO talking about the cultural equality, and they provide also, rather interestingly, they've expanded equality to also include disabilities, which is one of the least often presented aspects of EDI. So they obviously talk about gender, LGBTQ+, ethnic, racial, mental health and well-being, and disability. So they really embrace the whole breadth of EDI. So is it all done then? If we know it works, we have a business case for it, and we know senior management is on board. So, I mean, you could say generally people are positive, EDI matters and EDI works. So why is it that the ratio in the workplace is not representative of the UK population? This map shows you the BME working age population by city. So BME, Black and minority ethnic. And if I'm London-centric or at least centered around here, you can see several hubs where you have 40+% of the working age population represented by BME. This is not represented in our workplace. Our workforce is not 40+% BME in those cities. So the question is usually, is it one question of supply, demand, or is it something else? So in terms of supply, I'd like to start by kind of addressing one of the other common misconceptions. There are no within group predisposition. There are only social stereotypes and peer pressure. What I mean is, I know this figure is probably very small for you to see, but this was a study that was realized over many years where children were asked to draw a scientist. And what we can see here is the percentage of male scientists drawing. Please ignore the data in the gray column here. It's unreliable for several reasons. And so only focus on the dashed line here, which is more representative of the no generation rather than the previous generations. What you can see is that on average, you had about 70 to 75% of the children drawing a male scientist. What is interesting is that if we look at this plot here, plot D, which shows you the age of the respondent on the x-axis, and this is for the girls' drawings only. Age 6, most girls draw a female scientist, only 25% or 30% draw a male scientist. In other words, when they are young, girls have no predisposition and they think that they could be a scientist. But social stereotypes and peer pressure mean that this slope changes very rapidly. And by the time they're 16, they will draw the average roughly 80% male scientist. Amongst the boys, the curve changes a lot less. Well, why should it? You're born thinking that you're representing your own gender in what you draw, and then the social stereotypes and peer pressure create a reflection of the world where you can still see yourself, your personality reflected in the scientists that you see around you, so there is no changes. So what we can see here, and you should see, I mean, you have to, if you're interested, read Miller et al. It's a fantastic comprehensive reflection on the impact of social stereotypes, that there is no within group predisposition. And this really biases the supply of engineers. So this is a study by the Center for Longitudinal Studies where school-age children were asked what sort of profession they wanted to go into. Interestingly, so these children were aged 14 to 16, and 40% of girls want to have professional managerial occupations for 30% boys. Girls choose preferentially professions where there is mostly girls. So this is the percentage of women in the occupations that the girls have chosen, 60%, and boys choose preferentially professions where they can see male. And because of that, although many 10% more girls would like to have a profession which may be associated with higher wages, the average hourly wage that the girls would earn if they did achieve their goal would be significantly less, in fact, nearly 50% less than the average hourly wage that the boys would achieve, because the boys will pick the jobs with a dominant male and the girls will pick the job with a dominant female. And that leads to this inequality. So by the time a child is 14 to 16, they're already set for an unequal treatment when they reach the professional age. Engineers in the UK are predominantly white and male. I will present two data sets here. The first is from our own IMAPS UK membership, where we have about 10% women, and the other one is the IEEE CAS membership, so Circuit and Systems membership. As of March 2021, there were 86% male, 7% female, and then 8% that were unknown. So we get roughly the same results. And indeed, engineering students themselves tend to be 50 to 80% male, with gender balance mostly achieved in biomedical or chemical fields. So yes, certainly in the supply, there is a bias, and the bias is reflected from the supply amongst the younger age children up to engineering students and into the workforce, or at least represented here by these data on these two memberships. However, even if we allow for this, our workforce is still not representative of the supply. So there is a further issue that stops and diversity and inclusivity in engineering and in technical companies. So one of the questions that is often asked is recruitment biased, or is the issue with retention? In other words, are we recruiting staff in a way that is proportional to or representative to the population as a whole, but not retaining them, or are we already not recruiting them? And the questions really operate around the idea of equal treatment. So the data suggests that we do not have equal treatment. Again, this is from UK-focused data. Black workers with degrees earned as much as 23% less than the white workers as of 2016. And it's also really interested to look at unfair rejections, both in job applications, in pay rises, and in promotion. Yes, white people certainly do suffer from unfair rejections, but if you're Black, Asian, or minority ethnic, you are 33% likely to suffer a rejection for 20% amongst the white people. So one of the important messages here is not to say this is a problem that is exclusively affecting the minorities. It affects everyone, but it affects more the minorities. And that, I think, is a very important message. And the final point is equal treatment the same as equal opportunities? And it's not. So here is another study. This is a study in Australia with 848 respondents for the 2011 study and 1,200 respondents for the 2010 study, where what we can see is that male and female have a different impression of what is being done. You can see this both in terms of whether the leadership team has made gender parity a visible priority. Men think yes, women didn't think so. And qualified men and women have equal opportunity to be promoted on the same timeline to senior management and executive positions. Men think yes, women didn't. And these are really important aspects to think about. So I just want to finish this talk by thinking about something else, and it's the concept of diversity in the outsider. And I'd just like to tell you a very brief story of a friend of mine, whom, being significantly younger than his partner, was earning less than her when she gave birth to their first child. So he became the main caregiver after her maternity leave. He told me of his experience taking his baby to the pediatric clinic. The waiting room was full of women. His child was crying, and he felt sure that all the mothers were judging him. It didn't matter then, they were all there with their own sick children, some with unruly toddlers, nor did it matter that there were actually a few other dads in the room too. His experience was horrible. He had never before been the only one. He was a white man and he'd never experienced that. The fact that the mothers probably barely noticed him, some might have even smiled to him, certainly none had anything against him, but that did not matter. He felt that he stood out, he felt unwelcome, he was the outsider. And I want to really bring this forward to you. Remember being an outsider. We've all been the outsider once. And ask yourself what it would feel like to be the outsider every day. Every time you walk into a room, every time you go to a conference, every time you stand on a stage, every time you look around you, every time you go to a lab, every time you go to an office, you are the outsider. What would this have as an effect on you? So very quickly, because Andy tells me time is running out. So this study was really looking at how we understand the factors that contribute to the lower number of women than men in senior leadership roles. And I won't go over the data too much, but basically different people, depending on their own their own gender, because this is a gender study, will think differently about the barriers. And male tends to think about the barriers are being, well, women or female employees have family responsibilities and they choose to focus on their family responsibilities. Most female employees and some types of male employees really saw it as much more about style. Women understand their experience, leadership teams do not value the different perspectives, and senior men are more likely to appoint or promote someone with a similar style to their own. So in other words, are the people who influence the culture and make decisions representative of the outsiders? If they are not, how can they know what the barriers are? And we must be really careful of stereotypes. We must not assume that we know the limits, preference, and aspirations of others. And because I work in disability science, I want to show you this picture. You may not be inclined to think that this is your dream, to be crowd surfing at a massive festival, but do not presume that because you are not interested in it, and maybe you have your own personal barriers that would stop you from doing it, others cannot do it. You do not know, and you should not protect other people just because you feel out of kind inclination for them that you should not put them in a situation that would be uncomfortable for you. Ask others what their limits are. I'm going to skip the Nobel Prize talk. I can talk about it at the networking session afterwards. It's really interesting, but we don't have time for that. So just very quickly, what more can we do? We must be aware of the fact that old habits die hard. We need to focus on vigorous, constructive activism and allyship. Françoise mentioned it earlier. We need to support, we need to assess. We must lose all bad habits, but we must not lose track of the bigger picture. It's not about what we do individually. It's about what we do in our companies, what we do when we are a crowd, what we do when we make other people feel like the outsider. We need to target issues identified by the outsider communities, not by us as insiders. And again, if you want to know more, there are many reports filled with recommendations. You can look at the McGregor-Smith report if you're in the UK, and we can discuss that extensively in the networking session that will follow this presentation. Sorry, Andy, about my time. Thank you very much for your attention.